In this episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I have with me Bryan Wehler. Bryan is the president and CEO of ARM Group. And Bryan was just an engineer like you, right? But he worked hard, and one day he became the president and CEO. And in this episode, he talks a little bit about that transition, how it went for him, and he also talks about two key skills or traits that he believes engineers should build and leverage to become strong leaders in the industry. Let's jump right in. All right, now I'd like to introduce our guest. Bryan Wehler is the president of ARM Group. Bryan, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Thanks. Great to be here, Anthony.
So, Bryan, before we talk a little bit about ARM, talk about yourself for a minute. Just tell our audience about you. What's your background? Give us a little quick career overview here to start us off.
Yeah, sure. So I've been working for ARM Group for over 20 years now. I went to school to study geology. My father is a geologist, and so I had been exposed to that as a kid, always had an interest in it, liked to be outdoors. And so got that degree and actually came to work for ARM Group right out of college and was doing a fair amount of environmental consulting work, but also got exposed to some projects that had an engineering component to it and really took an interest in some of the engineering aspects of the environmental projects. So decided to go back to school and get an engineering degree as a second bachelor's, and then ended up doing a master's in engineering as well. And then came back to ARM Group and have really been here ever since. But I've been working in a variety of different areas over the years. First started out doing most of my work for the solid waste industry, doing a lot of work on landfills and doing a fair amount of geotechnical engineering. And through that experience, I got involved in some renewable energy projects with our landfill clients who expressed an interest in doing other things, gas to energy projects, eventually wind projects, solar projects. And over time, that really started to gain traction, and we ended up establishing a dedicated renewable energy practice that has done very well over the last few years. So that's kind of a little history of what I've been doing in my career here at ARM Group.
That's great. And so tell our viewers a little bit about ARM Group. Tell us about the company, the services you provide, about how big you are.
Sure. Yeah. So we are a multidisciplinary engineering firm. We have now 16 offices across the Mid-Atlantic region. We're in 6 different states. I think at last count, we had about 280 employees overall. We're headquartered here in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is where I'm located. But yeah, we work throughout the whole eastern seaboard, really, and but our offices are primarily in the Mid-Atlantic.
That's great. And I would imagine that when you started there roughly 20 years ago, you said, one day I'm going to be the president and CEO, right?
I can't say that was the long-term goal. It just kind of played out that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I'm interested to know just your kind of how you handled that, your thought process when you kind of realized that was a possibility. Like, was that something that was exciting? Was it a little bit overwhelming? I'm sure it was both, but just take us through kind of that window of when you kind of realize like, hey, I may be the president and CEO, and then it happens. How did that unfold for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's not something I've really put a lot of thought into, but I guess reflecting back when I was, coming up through the organization, I was working directly with both of the founders of the company. And so I think they had a good sense of, what I was able to do, and that they could count on me to do a good job and take care of our customers and to help manage and lead people. And then when the president of the company, decided he was ready to step back, he basically came to me and said, I want you to take over as the president of ARM Group at the time. Wow. And So I was really flattered by that, and it honestly came sooner than I was expecting. I was excited. I was nervous. And the reality is you have no idea what you're getting yourself into until you actually do it. And nobody can even try to explain it to you. You just have to experience it. But it's been good now. And I've been in this role for, I think, going on 8 or 9 years now.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I'm sure it's one of those roles in your career where no matter what people say about it, you don't really know, like you said, until you're doing it on a day-to-day basis for an amount of time. And I think something you said there is really important in terms of, building trust with the people you work with. I know for me, for sure, if I've been working with someone for a long time and they've repeatedly been reliable and consistent, right, and showing up and doing the work, that just builds an amazing amount of trust with someone when you're looking for someone to be a leader in the company or to take on a big project or a big client. So I think for those of you out there that might be listening in your careers, I think there's a lot that goes into showing up every day, doing the work, being consistent, being there for your team members. And when your company steps back and says, hey, we need to look for the next generation of leaders here, you're going to come up, right? Like those are the kind of people that the company wants to lean on because they know you're reliable and they know you're there. And so it's good to hear Bryan kind of talk through, his experience with that. And Bryan, another thing I wanted to ask you was just based on people that you've worked with and maybe people that have worked for you on projects or on your team and maybe have reported to you, if I asked them to kind of describe your management style, how do you think they'd respond to that question?
Yeah, it's always tough to speculate what others might say about you, but I would hope that they would say that I'm kind, respectful, but also very driven and a results-oriented person. So, I believe in, number one, hiring good people, developing good people, but giving them a lot of autonomy to do their jobs. But I also have very high expectations of people, and I would say I hold people accountable as well.
That's great, and I like that you used kind of the words kind and respectful and results driven there in the same sentence, if you will, because I think sometimes maybe people think they can't go together. But I think they have to go together, in my opinion, to really be a strong leader that people are going to respect. And, I think you have to hold people accountable 100%. But I think there's a way you can do it where people really want to work for you more, right? And do more things and be more excited. So I'm glad that you mentioned those together. So ARM Group is both privately and employee owned. You have a structure with both. Talk about how that structure benefits your engineers and kind of influences their work environment and their career growth.
Yeah, so our company is structured as an S corporation. So under that structure, we can have up to 100 shareholders. And we have currently, I think, about 71 shareholders in the company. And so we are truly a privately held, employee-owned company. It's not through an ESOP or some other type of structure. The employees that are shareholders own the company, and they are the beneficiaries of the growth and success of the business. And I do think that produces a certain level of ownership and responsibility amongst those people. And I think, we talk a lot here at ARM Group about an ownership mentality. What does it mean to have an ownership mentality? And that applies to shareholders, but also to non-shareholders. I mean, it's really about taking ownership of your projects, taking ownership of your clients, taking ownership of your responsibilities, and seeing things through and taking pride in the work that you do. So that's really the mindset that we've tried to foster, and our shareholders are by invitation only. When we identify that someone is exhibiting that ownership mentality and is really making an important contribution to the success of the company, then we will extend that opportunity to that individual. So that's how we work. It's a little different than how many other companies I think are set up, but it's worked well for us.
That's great. And I think it is nice because, I don't think everybody necessarily wants ownership in a company, but I'm sure that there are people that do. And I think it's a nice option for people that deserve it, that work for it, and that can be recognized in that way. So seems like a really nice benefit there. That's great. So you have kind of a bird's eye view over your company as the CEO, and you see the development of a lot of people. You see people step up into leadership roles. I'm sure you work with them, you talk with them, and I'm sure you interact with a lot of people in the industry. Based on what you've seen with the leaders in the industry today, what is maybe one of the key traits or a few key traits or skills that you feel are just really important and that you see in these leaders today that are important for those engineers listening that want to become really great leaders in the industry? What are a couple of skill sets you think they should focus on?
Well, I would say one of the very important skill sets are communication skills. You have to be able to communicate well, both verbally as well as written communication. I think that's really vital in our business. And it's important, obviously, when you're working with others to be an effective communicator. So that's one thing. I think continuing to push yourself to learn and to grow is really vital. The industry and the marketplace is changing rapidly, probably faster than it ever has. And you really have to, seek out the information and to keep pushing and learning new things so that you can continue to advance and lead and help your clients ultimately solve their problems. So those are, a couple of the things that come to mind. There's certainly other attributes that go into to leadership.
Yeah, I think the communication piece is really important because you have to communicate with a lot of different people, a lot of different stakeholders on your projects, right? Both internally with your team members, but then externally. And, in this industry, you could be dealing with the public, right? You could be dealing with agencies. You could be dealing with someone you've worked with for 10, 15 years. So I really think that communication skills are certainly important, but also understanding that there's a variety of different people that you're going to need to interact with throughout your career. And so it's kind of like one of those things, if you can really polish up those skills, they're really high leverage because you're probably going to use them every day, like in a lot of different ways. And I think that sometimes technical professionals will downgrade the importance of a skill like that because they feel like, hey, we're supposed to be doing technical work, right? We don't necessarily need to tell anybody about it, but you actually do need to tell people about it. And sometimes you've got to get approvals on your projects and you've got to influence people and, go out and get funding for your clients and different types of things. So I would say totally agree with Bryan on that. And you should put some effort and energy into developing those communication skills. And one of the things that was helpful for me was just working on my public speaking skills, because that helped me with my communication skills overall. So, joining something like a Toastmasters group or a Dale Carnegie or something that can help you with your speaking skills, even if you aren't a professional speaker, let's say, just helps you with those conversational skills in your relationship building, your communications. And I think a lot of CEOs like Bryan would tell you that that's a driving skill right now in this industry for sure. So, Bryan, you mentioned a little bit earlier renewable energy. So let's talk a little bit about that. Renewable energy, particularly solar energy, is a significant driver for your business. Can you talk a little bit about your Grid Gateway initiative and explain how it's kind of advancing the field of renewable energy engineering?
Certainly. So Grid Gateway really came about as a result of us entering the design build space where we were taking on the role of not only engineering the project, but actually constructing the project. And we've entered this space over the last, I'd say, 4 years. And in doing so, what we've recognized is that there's certain pieces of equipment that go into connecting a solar project to the grid that are I'll say, difficult to procure, or to procure within the timeframes that you need them to, or that you need that equipment. So what we recognized was that there was this deficiency within the marketplace for the essential equipment. The other piece of this was that there's several components that go into the equipment that is needed to connect the solar array to the grid. And typically those pieces are procured separately from different vendors. And then you have to, package them up and wire them together and get them all to fit and connect and communicate. So what we said was, hey, why don't we do this ourselves? Instead of dealing with 3 or 4 different parties, we can, produce this equipment ourselves, and we can design it all ourselves, and we can deliver it within a time frame that makes sense, not just for our projects, but for customers as well. So when we talk about the grid gateway, we're talking about equipment such as a switchboard, such as an intertie relay protection or IPR piece of equipment. We're talking about a transformer. We're talking about a data acquisition system. And not every project needs all of those things. Some projects might need 3 out of the 4, or some might only need 2. But through the companies that are part of the enterprise, we've been able to develop and actually construct and deliver this total turnkey solution to connect projects to the grid. So we're really excited about it.
That's awesome. It sounds like a very customer-centric product, right? Really thinking about the customer and making things easier, super innovative, like taking a bunch of steps that had to happen and kind of trying to eliminate some of them, which is awesome, which I think is like the way the world is moving, right? Everyone's looking for a simpler process these days, right? Like kind of give it to me in one shot as opposed to a lot of different steps. So I could see how there's a lot of value. And it sounds like what you're doing is you're adding a lot of value to the process, basically, which is awesome, right? Like stepping back, looking at all the pieces and figuring out how we can streamline it and make it better, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which to me is like engineering in a nutshell. But
right.
So just something I want to talk a little bit about. I know ARM Group includes ARM Enertech Associates and ARM Camco, or CAMCO, as someone might see it online. How do engineers kind of within these subsidiaries collaborate on these renewable energy projects, and kind of what are some of the innovative solutions that you've developed to help overcome some of these industry challenges, kind of like you've just described?
Sure. So ARM Group LLC is primarily the civil and environmental engineering and consulting business. Enertech is electrical engineering, automation, and control systems. And then Camco is electrical testing, electrical manufacturing, and field services. So those are the 3 companies that comprise the enterprise. The solar space really provides a unique opportunity for all 3 of those businesses to work together towards delivering a total solution for a given project. And as you can probably imagine, ARM is doing a lot of the civil design, the stormwater, the erosion and sedimentation control, the permitting, the land use approvals, and then Enertech is playing an integral role in developing the electrical design package, the medium voltage design, maybe the pole line, maybe there's a substation that's involved. They can do all of that design work. And then Camco can come in and actually, provide some of the equipment that may be needed for the project, like the grid gateway that we were just talking about, but additionally can provide the electrical testing and commissioning services that allow the system to be tested to ensure that it's operating correctly and in accordance with the utilities requirements, and then to actually turn that system on. So that's how the groups can work together on a given project. The grid gateway is certainly, I think, a good example of some of the innovation that can spawn from that collaboration. There's other examples, including where Enertech has developed a its own data acquisition system to serve as the monitoring system for a solar installation. So there's, as you can imagine, there's all kinds of sensors and things that need to be monitored on these systems as they operate, and it all comes back into a panel that allows you to monitor this remotely. And Enertech has actually developed that control system that allows for that data to be evaluated and monitored. So that's one example.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Again, you've taken kind of a process and you have people that can work on each piece of it and then work together on it, which is great. It's kind of like addressing every piece of that process and making the teams work collaborative on it, which is an awesome thing to kind of try to think through. So that's great. So let me ask you this question. There's a lot of our viewers that are maybe civil engineers or they're in the infrastructure industry and they want to grow, they want to become leaders in their firms. How can a professional in this industry kind of make sure that they're adding value for their organizations, especially with everything evolving so rapidly in our industry? Like, what advice would you give someone to kind of make sure that they're adding that value to their organization?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of ways to add value, and some of them are easier than others. Going back to what we talked about before, sometimes just doing what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it is adding value to your organization. Being proactive, trying to anticipate issues or challenges that a client might experience, for instance, or with the project that you're working on, is adding value because you're thinking ahead, what could go wrong, or did we consider this? Instead of just kind of doing, what needs to be done, you're going above and beyond. So that's adding value. Learning on your own is adding value, like taking the time to, read journals or publications or articles, or learning about a new technology or learning about a new software that just came out. That has huge, value add potential. And those are things that you can take the initiative to do. So those are a few things that come to mind.
Yeah. And it sounds like a lot of it is really, staying up to date yourself, right, on what's going on in the industry, keeping your knowledge sharp so that you can add that back to your organization and help them, address the challenges that are happening in the industry on a day-to-day basis. So that's great. All right. So last thing I wanted to ask you, Bryan, any final piece of advice that you can share based on your career and your experience from going from a technical professional to the highest levels of leadership in the industry? Any final pieces of career advice, growth advice, just from your own experience that you could share, key takeaways?
I think versatility is important. Being able to do a number of different things well is really important. In some respects, you have to be a generalist to be able to, I think, rise within the organization. And so I think that's really vital. I mean, there's really, no shortcuts. I'll say you have to put in the work. And, if you look at it as you're developing your craft, you're developing your skill, then it may not, or at least for me, it didn't feel like a burden. It didn't feel like a work. It was like, I'm getting better. The more time I spend doing this, the better I'm going to be at this. And so I was willing to put in, a lot of time to try to improve and to try to add value. And I think for me, that really paid off and really made a difference. And that would probably be, my primary message is, you just have to put in the work, and but it can be very rewarding, and it will allow you to get to wherever you want to go faster by putting forth that effort and that dedication.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, that seems like an awesome recipe, basically. We talked about it a little bit earlier, right? That longevity, like showing up every day, knowing that you're going to be in this for the long term, developing your craft, right? And I like what you said about also being versatile and kind of being open to different opportunities, because this is an evolving industry and there are probably jobs that will exist tomorrow in our industry that don't exist today, and services that your firm are going to offer in a few months or years from now that they don't offer today. And so someone showing up every day, developing your craft, and also being kind of open to doing different things for your organization, there's probably a lot of growth for someone that, shows up in that way every day. And obviously you're kind of living proof of that yourself, and got to the president and CEO, which is great. So again, congratulations on what you've accomplished in your career. Once again, Bryan Wehler. Bryan is the president and CEO of the ARM Group. And Bryan, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us today and sharing some of your experiences here on the Civil Engineering CEO. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Bryan. He made the points that I think are so important, right? You're in this for the long haul. You've got to show up to work each day, develop your craft, and I hope that was a key takeaway for you from my interview today. And if you liked the interview, please consider subscribing to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.